Greetings, score users. This is a continuation of the second demonstration of the labels program. This is the third in that series. And in this one, I want to talk about the labels.ini file a little bit, and then I'm going to show you how to toggle between long and short forms of margin labels. In creating the template, you probably noticed that there was an indentation that was being used and a certain staff size that was being used, and nowhere had I specified in the labels control file what those values should be. And that's because that's not controlled within the labels control file, it's controlled from a command line switch. And there are many command line switches for the labels program, easily over 100. And they can be used for many different purposes, and there are many that you will want to use again and again. And rather than having to type them individually at the command prompt when executing the program, it's much more efficient to have them in what I call the labels.ini file. And the ini file is an initialization file that's read by the labels program when it executes. And whatever command line switches it finds in that file, it then applies before it applies the switches that you have stated on the command line. And this ini file is nothing that is created by the program itself. It's something that you create yourself. It is simply a text file. And on the first line, you state the name of the program in brackets. And then subsequent to that, you just state all the command line switches that you wish to use. And so here is the M switch, which specifies which label control file to be used. And in this case, we're using the one that's called logic.lbl. And there's a switch to specify where your PSC files are being stored. Here they're being stored in the lib directory. Here's a switch that specifies where your symbol library is used, and that's needed for retrieving the system separator symbol and being able to measure it to figure out where the various systems are and pages that have multiple systems. Here is the P3 switch for specifying where your text items are to be anchored. And I prefer mine to be anchored at position -1, but to appear flush at position 0, which means that you would have a corresponding value of 1 and P11 so that the P3 and the P11 cancel each other out. And you can see over here in this file we're playing with, here's my label, and you notice P3 is at -1 and P11 is at 1. That means that effectively the label is at position 0. And you could have your label appear anywhere. You could have it centered in the white space. You could have it right justified with the system itself. You could have the label appear smack dab in the middle of the system, which would make no sense at all, but if you wanted to, you could put it there. But where the label appears and its anchor point are actually distinct. And so that's what the P3 switch allows. Here I'm specifying the size of the text, which is 201.1. And there is a switch that specifies the staff size so that you could maintain the very same text size from file to file, even when the staff sizes are changing. I'm not doing that here, but there's a way of doing that. And here at the end are two switches which were put to use in the template file that I created. The GTC8P5 means when you use the generate template switch, use a staff size of 0.7 in this case. And here's GTC8P3, and that means when you use the GT switch, create a staff whose P3 is, in this case, 25. And you can see that when I generated the template over here, the P3 is at 25 and the P5 is at 0.7. So those items came from command line switches, which in this case were stored in the labels.ini file. Okay, so now let's go back and look at the label control file itself, and we're going to talk about how we go between long and short forms of the margin labels. Now here is the make label statement that creates the clarinet labels. And you saw here where we have E-flat clarinet and clarinets both in an abbreviated form and here in a non-abbreviated long form. The default in labels is to use the short forms of the labels, because on most pages of your score that's what will be used. You will be using abbreviations. The long forms are typically only used on the very first page of a piece or of a movement. So the default is use the short form. If you want to use the long form, you request it specifically with a command line switch, and that command line switch is in fact the long switch. So if you say now we've edited the file using labels, and it has replaced the short forms with the long forms. It says B-flat clarinets and C trumpets and trombone. Just to show you, if we go back, if I do this without the long switch, then the short forms are used. So that concludes this part of the demonstration, and in the next one I will go over some of the alt logic that allows you to have different labels appearing based upon different conditions within the file itself.